Hey, welcome everybody to this week's episode. We're going to talk about sex, drugs, and rock and roll. Yahoo! This is great. So, you know what? You're going to be really, really blessed as you just tune into this. It's going to help you. If you got some, if there's some grandparents listening to this, you might be in the age to where that term was really common. But honestly, there's the same spirit that's operating today to try to draw people into this stuff. And so, listen, I just throw out some things that might help you be able to navigate this with your kids, with your grandkids, whatever your situation is, because we have to have this conversation. So be encouraged, be strengthened, be enlightened as you listen. So we're going to bring back an old saying from the 60s, probably, before our time, which is sex, drugs, and rock and roll. And this is something that really, honestly, there's like a spirit behind it that has worked to, mess things up and mess people up. And, during that whole hippie movement, it was like, that's what they were into.
Sex, drugs, and rock and roll.
Right. Right. Now, everything has a counterfeit. Everything real has a counterfeit. Sex, the way that God created it, is good, but there's counterfeit. That's not good.
Right.
There's not really a counterfeit drug. I'll say, because all drugs are bad. However, like the feeling of, I guess, like peace. I've never done drugs in my life, so I can't really speak from having done drugs, but I know what they do to people. They make them feel like when people smoke pot, they kind of like they chill out. It's like a counterfeit to peace,
right?
So the drugs, they are kind of a counterfeit in that sense, And so, but it's a perversion from the enemy to give people a feeling of euphoria, people that are on, ecstasy or whatever.
Right.
They're doing stuff, trying to give them something that is not, it's not the real, not the legit. And obviously
right.
People get deceived into doing that stuff. Why else would they do something that would totally destroy their mind and body?
Right. And you usually start low with something and you get that peace or that calmness or that euphoria feeling, and then it becomes not enough, but you need that feeling. We get accustomed to having that. And
so we're going to come back and talk about that, kind of like the gateway drug and things, like that. But then, so you get into the rock and roll thing, and of course there's a huge counterfeit to that, and people having this experience and being in, especially like concerts and like, oh, that was powerful, that was amazing. And it really, I'm not against rock and roll style music. I mean, I grew up listening to Christian rock, if you will. I listened to DC Talk growing up. And so, and it was great. I mean, it wasn't anointed worship music, but it was clean. It was good. It had a good message. And, I'm fine with that. So I don't have a problem with the style of music, but what comes in with that music, unless it's strictly godly, is usually really, really bad. It's really bad stuff. And so the idea of like the whole sex, drugs, and rock and roll thing is going on nowadays just as much.
Yeah.
It hasn't changed. And so how do we approach this, this subject and these topics is something that we need to know. We need to know what that looks like as parents. So go ahead, tell me your wisdom. Give us your wisdom on how we approach this.
So to me, it's not saying, no, you can't do this. Because anytime you say no especially to a child, it causes them to have suspicion or curiosity to rise, and they will want to go.
Okay, so let me stop you right there. So children don't ask about sex. So what are you saying? They don't ask about doing drugs. Well, they might if they're in a really bad environment.
I'm sorry. When I'm saying if you tell them, don't have sex outside of marriage, don't do drugs, don't listen to rock and roll, but then you don't have a conversation of why I'm saying no or why, then it's going to cause them to want to, because you basically, just told them no without giving them any reasoning of the why. So to me, it's very, very important to unlock a why we don't do things by starting a conversation with, what are drugs and why do people do drugs and what are the cons and how come we're not supposed to do that? Same with rock and roll. Why shouldn't we? What kind of music should we listen to? And it's like our flesh likes things. So even starting with a conversation of that, like our flesh desire things that are oftentimes bad for us. And so we have to know what's good and what's bad so that we can navigate. It's not saying, a lot of times we're saying don't do these things. And by saying no, you eliminate the possibility of the yes. When we say no to one thing, we're saying yes to something else. So I think it's not shedding so much. You have to have the conversation and communication about why these things are not good, but it's actually shedding light on why we do what we do. We pursue the Lord and we want to have standards and excellence. And why wouldn't we want to do drugs? Well, it's because it's a false sense of contentment or euphoria that doesn't last. And it helps release.
It's not that it just doesn't last. It's not right.
It's
not good.
It's not good.
Otherwise, if they came out with a drug that lasts, then one would be okay.
No, it's not good at all. But how come it's not good? And usually we're grasping at things to fill some sort of void inside of us. To make us feel better at a moment instead of, just really pursuing after the Lord in relationship with Him and getting release in that sense.
So what you're saying right now to me hits at the heart of this whole thing of sex, drugs, and rock and roll.
Right.
Okay, so there's a proper use of music. There's a proper, God's given us different hormones that release a sense of euphoria.
Right.
Because there's proper things we can do that would release that. And of course there's also, there's sex that God created that's supposed to be good.
Right.
But at the what the enemy's done is he's perverted things, and then at the heart of where a lot of people are at, and this is the heart of this issue, is they're trying to become content with something that they were never meant to be content with. They can't bring contentment. I mean, even godly kind of sex doesn't bring contentment. It brings obviously a sense of, satisfaction and it's proper within the bounds of, of marriage between a man and a woman. All of that is fine, but it doesn't really totally bring contentment to you.
Right.
Music is I've always loved music. Music runs through my family's veins. We're always singing songs and whatever. It's part of who we are.
Making little jingles, tapping out noises.
Yeah, becoming extremely annoying very quickly. So music has a sense of, it can make you feel a certain way. That's why you won't ever find a movie basically that doesn't have music in it. All movies have music because the music will change. And, based on how they're trying to make people feel during particular scenes or parts of the movie.
So true.
And so music is a powerful tool, but music is never supposed to be our contentment. Our contentment, being content in life, is only supposed to come from Him. There's a verse we were just talking about just yesterday from Psalm, I believe it's 73 if my memory serves me correctly, but it talks about that it says that He is my portion. My heart and my flesh will fail me, but my God will never fail me, for He is my portion.
Yeah.
And so it has to be the thing to where Jesus is the thing, the person, is the what satisfies us in this life. So when you find people that they're into wrong sex, put it that way, they're doing it because they're trying to find a fulfillment that they're never going to be fulfilled with. When you find people that are doing drugs, they're trying to find a high, if you will. They're trying to find a fulfillment in that they will never find.
Yeah.
And when you find people getting into, because I've been there before with music in my life, to where I would go and listen to, sometimes it's a release, but still, it's still a sense of fulfillment. I need to feel a certain way.
Right.
And then you find people, that the same thing with music. And I know I've been there before too, to where I would go and listen to music to make me feel a certain way. But it wasn't in faith. It wasn't godly. It wasn't right. It was just music. So there's all this conversation about, these things that need to be had, and parents need to have it. But it goes back to something that you said, that it's not about saying, no, you can't have that, but it's about helping them understand the dangers of it, but putting the right thing in place.
Right.
And it really, and this is the thing too, is it's not just like with music, for example, it's not just Christian music.
Right.
It's Jesus. And with friends that would do drugs, it's not just friends that don't do drugs. It's friends that are focused around Jesus, right? So everything has to come back to relationship with him. You can't just say, oh, well, I don't want you listening to, Leonard Skinner, but you can listen to, Petra or whatever. And for anybody that doesn't know who those bands are, Leonard Skinner is not a Christian band. Petra is one of the first rock and roll Christian bands. Anyways, you can go and listen to Petra all day long, and it doesn't mean you're connected with Jesus. It just means that you're listening to less. You're not listening to terrible music,
right.
But it's technically godly and edifying music. But are you connected with the Lord?
Right.
That's the point. And so, because he's the only one that can really, truly fulfill you. And that's where this comes back to. But this really started, us talking about this, started with a billboard that we have in town where it says talking to your kids about drugs is a difficult or challenging thing to do.
It's hard to talk to your kids about drugs.
Yeah.
And I was like, is it? Our kids were in the back seat and I was like,
kids, don't do drugs. Yeah. So, but there's a reason why that sign is up there.
Right.
And I can't really relate to that. So we were trying to put ourselves in kind of the people's shoes that would
say it's hard to talk to your kids about drugs.
And I think the only conclusion I could come up with is either they're dealing with such shame from their past,
right,
or they're currently in a situation to where they're using some kind of drugs and they won't talk to their kids about it, and therefore it's hard for them to talk to their kids about it because they themselves are still bound in it.
Or their kids are already bound in it and they don't know how to talk to them about it other than to say you shouldn't be doing that. But instead of it bringing them close, it drives them further away. It drives a further wedge. And I think that is the biggest problem, is that there is a wedge between even having a simple conversation about drugs. So it's not just having the conversation about drugs. It's like, what else are you not having conversations about?
Right.
Because if you are communicating with your kids, so communicating doesn't entail that you're saying, don't do this and do this. It's engaging in dialogue back and forth, because right now the world is so inundated where drugs are okay to do, especially if they're legalized, whether they're right or wrong. Alcohol's okay to have to a certain degree, or it's fine because, we're just going to go get drunk on the weekends when we're not really obligated to anything else. Or, everybody listens.
That's like most Christians. They're not obligated to come to church. Sorry, go ahead.
And, then with music, it's like, well, everybody's listening to this. It's just what is the norm right now. Like, it's pop culture and, it's fine. It's not hurting me. It's not helping me. So the whole thing is just starting to have conversation in general is so beneficial. And having conversation doesn't mean you're throwing down what it is that you say is right to do. It's about entering into a dialogue with your children.
Yeah, so I think we do this with our leaders in church, and the way we have things established is that we have regular meetings that we have with our leaders, and we try to connect with them on a personal level. Right. And we don't do that just for the sake of, let me tell you what I think. Let me tell you where things are bad. And let me tell you where you're wrong. Because if you only do that, like, who wants to have a conversation like that? Oh, great, we're meeting with Kent and Liz. What are they going to tell us we're doing wrong?
We're going to the principal's office.
Are they going to tell us that we can't do or whatever? And so the way that you approach challenging situations is that you already have a lot deposited there.
Right.
Just positive, like you look at a bank account, you can't make withdrawals if you haven't had deposits there. And so if you're not depositing it in your children, just a normal conversation, like if the only time you come to them is like, well, we need to talk, your mother and I need to talk to you about not using drugs. It's like, how awkward is that going to be?
Do we talk to them like that? We need to talk to you about
I don't know. I was just trying to make a exaggerated point. But, so that you can't just come to your kids and you can, but you shouldn't just come to your kids about, like, we need to talk to you about this problem. Just have it be part of your conversation. I learned this years ago from listening to a minister. Somebody had asked him, well, how do you do Bible studies with your kids? And he's like, honestly, we don't. He's like, we just talk about the Lord all the time.
Jaw dropping.
Yeah. A guy that you wouldn't think would say this, but he's got kids that are great serving the Lord, all that stuff. He's 75-ish and his kids are like our age or something. And so, in their 40s. And so they're serving the Lord. And it's like, what the point was is that he didn't make Jesus just a Bible study conversation. He made Jesus an everyday conversation with his kids. When they would go fishing, and when they would sit down at dinner, and when they were cleaning up the dishes, and before they were going to bed, they're all through the time. Jesus was a conversation with everything. And I think when it comes to talking about these really challenging things, people oftentimes and I'm not saying that there's not a place for sitting down and talking, about things, because I have to have another sex conversation coming up because we've got younger ones that are getting older and like they need, and of course they're all boys. So that responsibility primarily falls on me. And so I'm not saying like we're going to have a particular time where we sit down and say, let's talk about this, but it's not the only time I've ever mentioned sex to them.
Right.
We talk about and mention things concerning sex and about, things that are godly and ungodly in normal conversation. Right. It's normal for us to talk about those things. So whenever the reason it would be hard to talk to your kids about sex or about drugs or about bad music, something like that, the only reason it would be difficult to talk about those things is because you don't ever talk about them.
Right.
And like you relegate it to this one meeting where everybody feels really uncomfortable. You give your opinion. They don't know where it's coming from. They've never heard you talk about this before. And now the meeting's over and they're not sure what to do with it.
Right.
You need to have normal dialogue with your children. Mothering and fathering children is supposed to be taking live situations and having communication with them.
Right.
About those live situations.
That's right.
This isn't a board meeting where you come in and discuss something and say this is the edict that's passed down that the company is going to adhere to. This is about real life stuff that's going on that you walk through your children with it.
Right.
Yeah. So and I would say this too, and we're the next podcast we're going to talk about marijuana in particular, because that's a hot button topic considering that it's now legal and whatever. But this has to be something that, you make the decision that you're going to begin to talk to your children about these things and not make it be such a big deal.
Yeah,
but
like
just make
taboo.
it normal conversation. Don't make it taboo.
And ask them questions, and then ask them to ask you questions. Do they feel like that they can sit down and say, hey, Mom, on TV I saw this person, being drunk. Like, what is that about? Or maybe they haven't even heard the terminology drunk. Or I saw somebody drinking alcohol. Does that mean that they're drunk? Does that mean that they're bad? That they can ask those conversations. And then from that conversation can lead into a whole conversation that you can take as far as you can take with them.
Yeah.
And because they were able to ask the question, that means that they were ready to receive an answer to. Yeah. And it wasn't like this heated, crazy moment. It was just like, oh, I'm going to have a question. And because I know it's okay to ask you questions, then it's no problem. Yeah,
I think that especially Christian parents, a mistake that they've made is they've become so, like, it's good to have core values, obviously. We talk about that. It's good to have good morals and that you live that way. But I think that the mistake people make is they make law without making sense.
Yeah.
And so they're like, you will be home at 10 o'clock. Well, why? Because I said so.
Okay.
And your kid's like, okay, can we talk about this? I'm actually not a huge fan of curfews. We could talk about that another time. But anyways, because it builds mistrust in your kid from the start. And when they become the age of them starting to do some adulting things, you're actually restraining them, therefore instilling less trust in them, making them want to rebel more. So there's what I think about curfews in general, but there can be a place for it in certain situations. You got to be led by the Holy Ghost. But people oftentimes, they they'll pass down a law, and people are like, okay, well, we believe we shouldn't use drugs. Why? Why are you saying drugs are bad? There have been studies that have been done about the whole DARE program that's in schools, that it is actually done. Now, I don't have any proof of this, but I have heard people talk about this, that it has actually done more harm than it has good.
Interesting.
And it's because it's kind of, and I'm not against the standard, because it's like DARE to keep kids off drugs. Say no to drugs, kids. Like, I agree with that.
Right.
We want kids to say no to drugs, but the approach is more about
fear
and kind of fear than it is about educating them
about
on what's going on. And why would you even want to do drugs, and why are your kids doing drugs? It's not because they're all evil, and parents oftentimes, they inoculate themselves from, and Christian parents, they're like, no, we don't do anything with that. So it's a rated PG movie. That's too bad. We're not going to have anything to do with that. We are G, we only watch G movies. And I'm not saying you should watch our movies, but I am saying that, like, we pull ourselves back from everything that's going on in the world, and instead of helping our kids be able to see what's wrong and walk them through and navigate.
Yeah.
And again, there's a balance to this. You don't just go and let them watch, all kinds of stuff on their phones and whatever that they shouldn't be watching. And, you shouldn't just be like, oh yeah, go dabble in drugs a little bit. Let's talk about it. Like, I'm not saying that, but I am saying that we have to remove the fear from it and just begin to have conversations with it. Like, I took Kingston into downtown Seattle, probably 3 years ago.
Right.
Him and I went up there for something, and I took him downtown Seattle. It was like a cloud of marijuana rolling down the street. Because you and I have been there too. It's actually a terrible place, and all kinds of, weird stuff going on. Well, we just have made a determination. We're not going to make our kids wear, long sleeves and, cut their hair weird and, tell them that they can't do, all of this stuff because it's bad and of the devil, and not have some kind of explanation and communication. Right. So it does come back to communicating properly about these things. So we're going to go in next time we're going to talk more about, on the next episode, we're going to talk about marijuana use in particular. It's a big topic and something we can talk about. Yeah.
Thank you for listening in on this conversation. Make sure you subscribe to this podcast, give us a 5-star rating, and write a review. Share with your friends and on your socials. For more information about Ward Ministries, check out wardmen.org. If this podcast is encouraging you on your marriage and family, we want to hear about it. Email us at info@wardmen.org, and make sure you keep your eye out weekly for the latest podcast on marriage and family.